All right, let's get right into it. Inside the American prison system, there is no punishment more severe, more isolating than solitary confinement. And right now, it's at the center of this huge legal and political firestorm in New York, one that's forcing us to ask some really tough questions about justice, safety, and the limits of power.
You know that warning from former Supreme Court Justice Kennedy? It's not just some abstract thought. It gets right to the human stakes of a battle that's being fought on two different fronts. We're going to look at one man's decades-long fight in the courtroom and a statewide war over a law that tried to change the entire system.
So to really get what this fight is all about, we first have to understand a really critical distinction, because, as all the legal documents show, not all solitary confinement is the same. The reason someone is isolated, well, that changes everything.
First off, let's just be crystal clear on the conditions we're talking about. Imagine a concrete cell about the size of a parking spot. For 22, sometimes 24 hours a day, a person is in there, completely alone, cut off from almost all human contact. It's a reality that courts have said can cause just devastating psychological and physical damage.
Okay, this slide right here gets to the absolute heart of the issue. On one side, you've got disciplinary segregation. Think of that like a specific sentence for breaking a rule, right? It has a start date and it has an end date. But then on the other side, you have administrative segregation, or ADSEG, and this is a whole different beast. It's not punishment for something you did. It's a preventative measure because someone thinks you might be a threat. And here's the real kicker. It's indefinite. There's no end date. It just goes on and on until someone decides it's stopped.
And that difference between a fixed sentence and an endless status, it's not just a legal definition. It's the entire story of one man, a story that has stretched over 2 decades in the solitary cells of New York's prisons. So let's talk about Tyrone Walker.
So Walker goes to prison in 1994. In 2000, after a violent attack, he gets a 14-year sentence in disciplinary segregation. But here is the moment everything changes. In 2014, when that 14-year punishment is over, he's not released back into the general prison population. Nope, he is immediately reclassified and put into that indefinite administrative segregation. For the next 5 years, his status gets reviewed again and again and again, until a court finally decides to step in.
46. That's how many times? Over 5 years, officials reviewed Walker's case 46 separate times. And 46 times, they came to the exact same conclusion: keep him in solitary.
And this is the kind of stuff you'd see in those reviews, year after year. The justification always went back to his past actions, especially that attack from the year 2000. It basically set the story of who he was, and that story never changed.
And here's the wild part. Even as years went by and Walker's own behavior reports started saying he was appropriate and caused no issues, the reasoning in those reviews barely budged. An appeals court later called them repetitive and rote, which is basically a polite way of saying they were just copied and pasted. And this right here, this quote, just perfectly captures the court's biggest problem. Officials used what the court called patently circular logic. It's a catch-22. They basically argued, hey, the fact that Walker hasn't been violent in solitary proves that solitary is working, so we have to keep him in solitary. His good behavior was twisted into a reason to keep him locked down.
So, look, the court's decision wasn't about whether Walker should just be let go. It was about whether the process to keep him there was even constitutional. It gets into this legal idea of due process, which means the government has to play fair. And in this context, that means a meaningful review, one where the outcome isn't already decided. A review that actually looks at who a person is now, not just endlessly rehashing the past. The big question was, were these 46 reviews a real evaluation, or were they just a rubber stamp?
Now, as Walker's case was slowly winding its way through the courts, a much bigger fight over these exact same issues was blowing up in the New York State legislature, and it all led to this one landmark law.
So in 2021, the HALT Act was passed, and it was a direct answer to stories just like Walker's. HALT stands for Humane Alternatives to Long-Term Solitary Confinement, and its goals were huge. It wanted to cap solitary at 15 days, create actual rehab programs, and even for those in isolation, mandate hours of programming outside their cells.
But the fight was far from over. In early 2025, the governor's office suspended the law, saying there were safety concerns. But when that suspension just kept going, advocates sued, and a state judge ended up siding with them, ruling that the administration had violated the separation of powers. The judge said the state wholly failed to demonstrate any rational reason for suspending the law in the first place. So, here we are. We've got these two major fights happening at the same time. One man's legal case and a statewide war over one law. When you put them together, what do they really tell us?
Both of these fights really boil down to the exact same tension. On one side, you have the state's genuine need for safety and security in its prisons. But on the other side, you have an individual's right to a process that's actually meaningful, not just a rubber stamp. It's a clash between a system that's designed to stop future harm and the big question of whether that same system leaves any room for a person to change.
So where are we today? Well, Tyrone Walker has been moved out of solitary confinement, and a judge's order has put the HALT Act back into effect. But the fundamental questions that both of these battles brought to the surface, well, they are far from being settled.
Which leaves us with this final, really challenging thought. Both Walker's case and the fight over the HALT Act force us to ask a tough question. When a system is built entirely to manage risk, how does it ever make room for redemption? If good behavior in solitary is just seen as proof that solitary is working, how can anyone ever prove they're ready to get out? It's a paradox right at the heart of our justice system, and it's one New York is still trying to figure out.